Dear students, welcome back to yet another session of English class. I hope all of you are safe and sound, remaining at home during this lockdown period. So, as we are spending time at home these days, let us be serious about our studies as well, because the time that is given to us is really short, and once the schools reopen, we do not know at what speed we need to kind of catch up with the syllabus. So I hope you're all following the online lessons and you're also busy with completing the assignments. Well, today we will have a continuation of the lesson, the triumph of surgery. And if you remember in the last class, I had told you the meaning of the word surgery. It generally means an operation performed by a doctor. That is a surgery. But here in this lesson, the word surgery means a place where patients are treated. So you must keep this point in mind while going through the lesson. The triumph of surgery. Triumph, it is a victory. So what is a victory and what is the surgery? And who is behind this victory? What are the characters involved in this? We have had some discussion regarding this, but let us continue with the discussion today. You see, the major characters, as we have already discussed, are Tricky the dog, then Harriet, the doctor who treats Tricky, the vet or the veterinarian, and the owner of the dog, that is Mrs. Pumphrey. So these are the three major characters, and to start with, the first line of the lesson, if you look at the book, would be this: I was worried about Tricky this time. I was worried about Tricky this time. Now, who is this I? I is none other than Harriet, who is the writer of the lesson. Now, why was he worried? There are some reasons for that. Tricky was becoming fat. He was bloating up, swelling up like a sausage, and then he had bloodshot eyes. You see, when your eyes become bloodshot, if they appear red in color, it means there is something wrong with your health or there is some problem there. So his eyes turned out to be bloodshot. So bloated like a sausage, he was expanding, swelling, and his eyes became red, and because of these symptoms, Dr. Harriet begins to show concern. He thought that something dangerous is going to happen to Tricky. Tricky is going to land himself in some trouble. He is in for trouble. He understood the symptoms because doctors, they analyze a patient with the help of the symptoms. So here the symptoms are not good. Tricky is he's going through a difficult stage, a crucial stage in his life, and that is obesity, right? Then Mrs. Pumphrey explains, when Dr. Harriet saw Mrs. Pumphrey walking the dog, he could understand that the dog was in hot water. He was going through a difficult period. The symptoms were negative. They were not kind of positive. The symptoms were telling that the dog was in trouble. And he asks Mrs. Pumphrey, Mrs. Pumphrey, I had already told you to walk the dog, give him some exercise, and I also advised you to cut down on sweets. She was giving a lot of sweet things for Tricky to eat, like pastry, chocolates, ice cream, puddings, and many other things, good things which were sweet. And Dr. Pumphrey had strictly warned her to avoid these things. So he's asking a question: did you cut down on sweets? Did you give him good exercise? Did you put him on a diet? And Mrs. Pumphrey, you see, she says, Doctor, the dog stopped eating and he was becoming less and less active, inactive, passive. So I thought that he was suffering from malnutrition. He was lacking energy. He was lacking the vitamins that his body required. Therefore, I began to give him something extra. So this word extras mean a lot. What does the word extras mean? It means she was giving him some Horlicks, she was giving him some cod liver oil, and she was also giving him some extra food items. So cod liver oil was given, Horlicks was given, malt was given, that extra food. Malt is a kind of, food item prepared from barley. So Mrs. Pumphrey is overfeeding the dog. She didn't understand the real problem of the dog. The dog was refusing to eat because it was suffering from obesity. Fat was getting accumulated, deposition of fat in the body. But she didn't understand that. What she thought was, he's suffering from malnutrition, therefore I need to give him something extra. And she actually gave an explanation about the extras to the doctor. Now the doctor understood that Mrs. Pumphrey is on the wrong track. She is spoiling the dog. And Dr. Harriet came out with a discovery. What was the discovery? Greed was the problem. You see, Tricky was such a dog that it would go on eating and eating and eating. Endless eating. The more you give, the more he eats. He did not know his limits. Therefore, when you don't know your limits, you end up in greed. Now, this is not only for Tricky. This is the case with all of us. When we cross our limits, when we do something that is more than what is required, obviously, we get into the problem of greed. And greed definitely goes before a fall. Greed for money, greed for property, greed for name, greed for anything will definitely lead you in the path of, towards the path of destruction. That is what was happening. So here we have an important message, greed. So the writer is focusing how greed affects a person. So Tricky is a victim of greed, but all of us can become victims of greed. So we need to be on our guard. We always need to be on our check. Do not do anything that is more than required. That is another important message that we get from this lesson. Too much of anything is good for nothing. When you overdo something, be it the overdose of entertainment, are you spending too much time with your mobile? Are you giving more importance to mobile than your studies? Of course, you are greedy. Are you not sleeping during the proper time? Are you keeping yourself awake late night, till late night? Of course, you are greedy. So, this particular vice, we call this greed as vice, V-I-C-E. And what do you mean by vice? A very bad quality that will destroy you. Greed is a vice. So, be on your guard. Have a check on this greed. Now, coming back to the lesson, Harriet warns Pumphrey this time. Mrs. Pumphrey is given a strict warning and he says, Mrs. Pumphrey, this time you need to kind of pay the maximum attention to Tricky. You have to give all the care, and what you need to do is cut down on sweets, give him plenty of exercise, reduce the amount of food that you are giving, and keep him on a strict diet. You see, another important message the writer is giving us is strict diet. Diet is very important in a person's life. How much you eat is not important. What you eat is important. And how you eat and when you eat, your food is important. Taking meals at the right time is very important. Taking the right kind of food items is more important than that. So instead of going for all this in-between snacks, going for all the foodstuffs which are artificially made like noodles and burgers and pizzas and rolls and whatnot. All these things, they bring down your health. They tell upon your health. So, what you eat matters a lot. Tricky did not know what she was eating because she's after all a dog. But whose responsibility was it to feed the dog? It was Pumphrey's responsibility because she was the owner of the dog. She was petting the dog. So she had to take care of the dog and she had to put him on the right diet, but she did not do that. And when Dr. Harriet asked her, the reply that she gave was, "Oh, I cannot do that, doctor. I love my dog so much." This is a problem, you know. Sometimes love plays spoil sport. What is the meaning of spoiled sport? Destroying something. Love destroys some people's lives when they try to do things, okay, in an excessive manner. So if you are doing anything too much, if you are doing anything more than what is required, obviously you have the vice of greed in you, you lose control of yourself, and when you lose control over your diet, obviously you are in for trouble, and one of the symptoms is obesity. So Mrs. Pumphrey was the cause of Tricky's problem. How was she the cause of Tricky's problem? She was pampering Tricky, overdoing something. She simply told Dr. Harriet, "Doctor, I cannot refuse any good things to my dog. I have to feed her and feed her and feed her. And I enjoy seeing my dog Tricky eating more and more." That was the problem. So excessive, doing something more than what is required, whether it is eating or working, that will land you in trouble, that will put you into trouble. So now Dr. Harriet says, nothing doing. You have to be watchful and you have to put Tricky on a strict diet, give him more exercises, otherwise Tricky will be in trouble. So that was a warning. And after a few days, Dr. Harriet once again sees Tricky with her owner, that is Mrs. Pumphrey, but the condition was worsening. It was turning from bad to worse. How was it turning from bad to worse? Tricky stopped eating. He stopped eating and he began to totter. What is the meaning of totter? Walking in a very slow manner. Not walking in the normal way. Not walking in an active manner. So what happened? He began to totter. He lost his balance while walking because he was already a bloated sausage, and he lost his appetite for food. What do you mean by appetite for food? Taste for food. He stopped eating altogether because he lost his taste for food. You see, if you do not have taste for doing anything, you cannot involve yourself in that. This is applicable in all areas of life. If you have no taste for study, you cannot touch your books. If you have no taste for games, you cannot play games. If you have no taste to pray, then you will not go to the temple or mosque or church, whatever it may be. So taste. Here you see, he lost his taste for food, lost his craving for food, and vomiting started. You see, when somebody vomits, we can understand that the person's health is not okay. So this dog, that is that beautiful Tricky, started vomiting and he stopped moving. He slept on a rug. What is the meaning of rug? A torn piece of cloth or an old piece of cloth. He just went to a corner of the room where there was a rug and he laid himself there and he was taking rest. Dogs are active creatures, if you notice them carefully, but here the opposite is happening. Instead of moving around and running about, he began to sleep on a rug. Okay? So then, he began panting. What is the meaning of panting? Struggling for breath, you know. You don't kind of feel comfortable in breathing. You see, when patients are affected by this coronavirus, they start panting. That is what is happening all around us today. Have you ever seen patients struggling for their breath because of the corona infection? That is the meaning for the word panting, and the dog Tricky was panting. He could not breathe because of the deposition of fat. Fat has begun to accumulate. So Harriet understood this. Now, Mrs. Pumphrey is giving a distress call. Who is giving a distress call? Mrs. Pumphrey is giving a distress call to Dr. Harriet. She phones him up. She rings and says, "Oh doctor, I do not know what to do with my Tricky." Well, what's the problem? Refuses to eat, lost his appetite, starts vomiting, has become inactive, starts sleeping on a rug, and he's panting. You see, Dr. Harriet was a very sensible man. He knew what was going to happen to Tricky. He was aware of the problem, well aware of the problem, and he makes his plan. So what was his plan? He insists on Tricky's admission. So he called Mrs. Pumphrey and said, "Pumphrey, come here." And he told her, you see, now Tricky cannot remain in your house. If Tricky remains to be or continues to remain in your house, there is more problem and more dangers which are awaited. So it is high time that you admit Tricky in a hospital, and he has to be he has to remain in the hospital, he has to remain in the surgery, he has to remain in the clinic for 14 days. You see, the number 14 has become very famous these days. You know why? 14 represents quarantine. Any patient who is seen with the symptoms of the infection of coronavirus is quarantined, taken and kept aside for 14 days. Now, Tricky is going to be quarantined for 14 days. And you know what happened? Pumphrey was so upset when she heard that Tricky is going to be there in the surgery for 14 days. She was unwilling. She said, no doctor, how can this happen? But Mr. Harriet said, if you want your dog alive, this is a solution. So finally, she agrees. She accepts. And then Mr. Harriet, the vet, he takes a very solid decision, and you see, he says, I took a firm line. You will notice this expression in your lesson. I took a firm line. What does the word mean? I took a firm line? It means I took a very solid decision, a strong decision. He has to be admitted. Tricky has to be admitted in the hospital. So, the doctor is actually the real hero of the lesson. It is not Tricky, or I wouldn't even call Mrs. Pumphrey as the hero. There is no chance for that. But it is Mr. Harriet who comes in to save the life of the dog, and you can call Mr. Harriet as a savior. What is the meaning of savior? One who saves. So he is the savior of Tricky. He saved the life of Tricky. He did a wonderful job. Then he came in a small car one fine day and took Tricky in, put him in the car. And once he was taken inside the car, you know, Mrs. Pumphrey and all the staff, they were moved to tears. Pumphrey literally cried. From this we can understand the love that existed between Pumphrey and Tricky. You see, she's a very good lady. Pumphrey is not a bad character at all. But she was ignorant of the health of Tricky. Otherwise, Tricky was everything for her. And you know, when Tricky was going to be admitted, she and her staff, she was a rich lady, so she had lots of people working for her, many employees. All of them were busy putting the things of Tricky into the car. They brought the breakfast bowl, they brought the lunch bowl, they brought the dinner bowl, they brought different coats which were used by Tricky, different toys which were used by Tricky, different bedspreads used by Tricky, and many other things. So they had to be stuffed inside the car. But Dr. Harriet did not have enough space in his car to put everything. So he just locked the door of the car and rushed to the surgery, taking Tricky along with him. Then, while he was sitting inside the car, he looked at the face of Tricky and he was really touched. You know, Harriet was a very sympathetic man, very much concerned about the health of Tricky, and he was an experienced veterinary doctor or a vet. So, on looking at Tricky, he said, "You have no kick, but I will find a cure." This sentence is very important. Questions will be definitely asked on this. You have no kick, but I will find a cure. What does this line mean? No kick. What is the meaning of kick? It's not kicking a ball or kicking something. It means you have no life in you. You have no energy in you. You are not active like before. But I will find a cure. He says, I have a solution for this. Don't worry. And by saying these words, he rushed Tricky to the clinic. Well, before we wind up, let us have some important questions related to this particular part of the lesson. We will discuss the lesson part by part, and as we discuss every part of the lesson, we will also analyze the questions. Now, we look at this. Why is Pumphrey worried? Find out the answer for yourself. And it has been explained to you. So try to write the answers for these questions. Why is Pumphrey worried? Question number 1. Is Mrs. Pumphrey wise? Can you call Mrs. Pumphrey as a wise lady, or was she ignorant? Was she foolish as far as the health of Tricky was concerned? What is your answer? Then, how did the staff send away Tricky to the surgery? This passage has a lot of importance. I mean, this incident has a lot of importance, not the passage. If you read the passage in the book, you will come to know the different things used by Tricky and how the staff, were trying to stuff them inside the car. And finally, this line has a lot of meaning. They were all moved to tears. Moved to tears. Mrs. Pumphrey and the staff were moved to tears. This shows that the relationship between Tricky and the family of Mrs. Pumphrey, had. Alright, then we come to another important question. Tricky lived a comfortable life. How do you know that? Tricky lived a comfortable life. There are many examples to prove that. You must read the lesson and the answer lies in the lesson. So the things used by Tricky is a very clear example to show that he was living a comfortable life. The food items that were eaten by Tricky is again another clear-cut example to prove that he was living a comfortable life. Another important question. How does greed affect Tricky? You see, the writer says greed was a problem with Tricky. Greed was a problem. But how did greed come into Tricky's life? In what form did greed come? And how did greed put Tricky into trouble? What is the message? There is a beautiful message through this line. Greed was the problem. Explain. How did greed affect Tricky's life? And how does greed affect our lives? This might be a value-based question as well. And what is the message? Harriet was a sensitive, concerned and a practical person. Prove it. How do you know that Harriet was sensitive? How do you know that he was concerned? How do you know that he was practical? There are examples to prove that. He was bothered, very much bothered about Tricky's health. And the most important thing is that he finds a cure for Tricky. He becomes a savior of Tricky's life. That exactly is the answer. You find out from the book and start writing the answers by yourself. The last one, cure. What is the cure suggested by Harriet? What kind of treatment did he give to Tricky? Well, if you read the whole lesson, entire lesson, you will understand that. So the word cure means a lot in this lesson. It has a specific, meaning, and it has its own significance in the lesson. Cure. What was the cure? And what was the result of the cure? You have to read the lesson to get an answer for that. So I think we shall wind up today's class with these points. And tomorrow we will get into the, the most important part of the lesson. That is the treatment. How did Dr. Harriet start his treatment? How did Tricky respond? And what was the result of the response? So keep these points in mind. Till then, stay safe and goodbye.